But out of all of the Egyptian mummies in the British Museum, I think this one is the spookiest, the scariest, and the creepiest. I'm Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm here at the British Museum. The calendar has just ticked over to the first day of autumn, and I'm here to show you some of the spookiest, goriest, and most unsettling objects. Today we've got severed heads, human sacrifices, wrathful goddesses, musical instruments made of human bones, evil demons, bog bodies, and even more human sacrifices. Not to mention some supposedly haunted objects. But speaking of ghosts and haunted objects, regular viewers of my channel will know that as much as I'd like to, I don't believe in ghosts. You can watch my latest video about the Conjuring Museum in order to learn more about my thoughts and feelings on that. I personally think that makes me a good spooky tour guide because I'm always looking for the real histories and facts behind tales of haunting instead of just going on vibes. This isn't my first video about the British Museum, and I'm sure it won't be the last. And by the way, if you want to learn more about the controversial nature of this museum and explore the debate around the repatriation of stolen items, I have a video just on that topic. It's linked above. But for today, let's just escape into a world of spooky, gory, and uncanny stories. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm delighted to have you here, and I'd love it if you would hit subscribe. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. And you might be interested in joining my Patreon. There you get an extra video tour every single month. October's tour is the goriest paintings in the National Gallery. We're starting our tour today with the two objects that I think are the scariest. This is a sacrificial knife. You can see that in the form of a crouching eagle warrior with a flint blade. The handle is cedar wood, covered with a mosaic made of turquoise, malachite, and 3 types of shell. And it was all glued together using pine resin. Neat, right? Well, let's go back to one of the words that I kind of glossed over. This is a sacrificial knife, also known as a tekpatl, used for human sacrifice. They could also be used for close-range combat by the legendary jaguar warriors. While many tekpatl knives have a red top half to symbolize blood, and some of them even have funny faces, this one has a warrior motif. Human sacrifice was a common part of the religious and spiritual lives of many parts of Mesoamerica. While the Aztec civilization was the last pre-Columbian empire in Mexico, the Puripechas, Toltecs, and the Maya, who we'll talk about shortly, performed sacrifices as well. However, while human sacrifice was a rather big event and also quite rare in those civilizations, for the Aztecs, human sacrifice was a daily occurrence. It was believed that life was only made possible due to the sacrifices of their complex pantheon of gods, and so human sacrifice also showed gratitude and was thought to sustain the universe. Knives like this one might be used in the Flower Wars, which consisted of close combat on the battlefield with the goal of wounding but not killing the opponent, and then bringing him home to be sacrificed, which was considered a great honor. But other people were also sacrificed according to the calendar for different celebrations and rituals that took place throughout the year according to the stars. Those about to be sacrificed were treated like celebrities. People would come to visit them in their homes and practically ask them for autographs. They were treated very well. The Spanish conquistadors wrote about the fact that they sometimes tried to, quote, free some of these potential human sacrifice victims before the event, and the men, women, and children would refuse to go with them. For them, this was the ultimate honor. But if you've been raised in a tradition like this, there might be an element of brainwash. The victim would be laid on a stone slab called a chakmul by 4 priests, and then a 5th priest would use a knife like this to slice open their abdomen, rip out their heart, and then place it in a bowl like this one, and we'll come back to this in a short time. We can see the heart flying away in this illustration. Now, finally, the viscera was fed to zoo animals, and the bleeding head was placed on display in the zompantli, also known as the skull rack. In some instances, the priests and warriors would be offered the meaty limbs to eat themselves. Now let's come back to this bowl. This is an eagle Cuauhxicalli, an altar-like stone vessel that was used for holding human hearts. The shape of the vessel mimics a pottery jar used for pulque, which was a mildly alcoholic drink made by fermenting agave sap, so kind of like a low alcohol mezcal, I guess. You can see that the top of the jar is decorated with bands of feathers, jade, and human hearts, just in case there was any doubt about what this was for. In this room, we also have a few depictions of Aztec gods. One of them is a human skull covered in mosaic representing Tezcatlipoca, and a statue of Mictlantecuhtli, the Aztec god of death and the king of the underworld. But we're going to start with the human skull, obviously. This skull looks fearsome, but is actually a symbol of fertility, health, and abundance. We're going to see those close symbolic links between life and death again and again on our tour today. Tezcatlipoca, also known as Smoking Mirror, is one of the Aztec creator gods and a god of war, as well as obsidian, and we'll come back to some Aztec obsidian in an unexpected place today. Here he is represented with this human skull, covered with turquoise and lignite mosaic. I love these long deerskin straps. These were originally painted red, and though this whole thing looks like a mask, it was probably worn as a back ornament, and here you can see it from the back. His main festival was Cuauhxicalli, which, like most religious festivals of Aztec culture, involved human sacrifice. Now, while this display case is endlessly fascinating, let's go back to that stone sculpture of Mictlantecuhtli. Now, worshipping him definitely included human sacrifice, as well as ritual cannibalism. Mictlantecuhtli usually has a blood-spattered skeleton, and while his head is just a skull, he does have eyeballs. He also often wears a necklace of human eyeballs, but sadly, this statue doesn't have it. Only I would say sadly to that. His stretched ears are plugged with human bones, and we're going to see that again with Kali in India. His mouth is usually at least partially open because he swallows the stars during the daytime. In 1994, a team of Mexican archaeologists discovered these two monumental ceramic figures of Mictlantecuhtli in tunnels excavated under central Mexico City, the former site of the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan. Now here in the British Museum, he's in his seated form, and this stone statue dates between 1325 and 1500 and is carved from sandstone. It's covered in traces of human blood because the statues would be bathed in it. We're heading about 700 years earlier to the Mayan civilization. They ruled much of Mexico and Central America between around 250 and 1000 CE, ultimately splitting into around 60 separate Mayan city-states. Here we can see a lintel stone. It was originally positioned above the doorway at Huauhxicalli, and you can see what it would have looked like in this model. Look at the little orange bits above the door, and that's where these lintels would have been positioned. Together, they provide a detailed dynastic record in both text and image. This one in particular is the one I want to focus on today. It depicts a scene of bloodletting. We can see that from the text at the top that this occurred in October of 709. Now, as many of you know, I cover a lot of medical museums on my channel. And so normally when I'm talking about bloodletting, I'm talking about something for health, having to do with barber surgeons and maybe even leeches. But that's not the kind of bloodletting taking place here. I often get my tour guests, and remember, you can come on this tour with me in person, to look at this lintel and tell me if they can identify where the bloodletting is actually taking place in the scene. In this carving, King Shield Jaguar III stands facing his wife and aunt, Lady Choc. He is holding a flaming torch, which you can see up in the top right corner. I love the detail on this. Now, again, can you look at this and tell where the bloodletting is taking place? Well, Lady Choc is pulling a rope embedded with obsidian thorns straight through the center of her tongue. The whole ritual allows her to contact Shield Jaguar's ancestors in the spirit realm. Now remember, Mayan rulers gained their power from communicating with the spirits and ancestors. This was often facilitated with bloodletting rituals, which were an important part of the culture. Lady Chalk's blood sacrifice echoed Mayan creation stories when the gods engaged in bloodletting to create the human race. By doing this very painful ritual in front of a huge crowd of people, the queen demonstrated moral and physical strength and proved herself to be a worthy consort. Look at her elaborately woven tunic, complete with this brooch and sun god pectorals. That is, elaborate pectoral decorations like these ones. As her blood soaks the cloths at the bottom of the lintel, you can see the spirit start to reveal itself up towards the top. And I just love that spirit head there. Wow. Now, any teenager in the 90s will remember that piercing your tongue actually heals really quickly. So even though this looks like an extremely dramatic act and would have bled a lot, Lady Chalk probably would have recovered quite quickly from this act. I've just made my way over to the South Asia galleries, but they also have some objects here from Tibet. Now, just before we talk about some of the objects in this gallery, I just want to make it clear that there's nothing, quote, spooky about Hinduism or Buddhism, but these religions, metaphorical and sometimes not so metaphorical, use of skulls and human flesh in rituals and magic definitely fits into the topic of our tour today. This display case features objects from the Tibetan Buddhist practices of Tantra, part of the deeply esoteric Vajrayana tradition. Now, if the word Tantra brings X-rated thoughts into your head, that's mostly because of the way that it's been depicted in Western culture. You can thank Richard Gere for that. In reality, Tantra is a spiritual practice found in both Hinduism and Buddhism that engages in elaborate rituals in order to attain enlightenment on a faster track. One of the ways that a tantric practitioner seeks enlightenment is through a full acceptance of death. And so there are a lot of human bone objects in Tantra rituals. Here we can see an elaborate 19th century skull cup called a Kapala with its ornate metal base and cover. It's almost unrecognizable as a human skull when it's done up like this. Now, this was part of a communal tantric practice performed by a group of lamas over several days. Now, for example, here we can see an important tantric goddess, Vajrayogini, drinking from a Kapala full of blood. And we'll see that very soon again with Chamunda. Next to the Kapala, here's a Kangling, or a trumpet made out of a human thigh bone. This is used for a specific Tantra ritual called chode, or cutting through the ego. During this ritual, monks use a double-sided drum while the other plays the Kangling. The haunting song of these instruments together is said to summon spirits. And then those spirits feast on your visualization of your own dismembered corpse. Visualizing your own dismembered corpse helps you to cut through your physical attachment to this realm. Do you remember that TV show Oddities? The Kangling thigh bone trumpets always remind me of an episode where Genesis P. Orridge, the former lead singer of the band Throbbing Gristle, came in and they made him play one on camera. I'll never forget that. There's no denying that there is something really phallic about this one, and that's probably part of its appeal and sacred masculine energy. These aren't on display right now, but let's also have a peek at this Rus Gayan. This would be worn by monks and lamas during public festivals. It's made out of pieces of intricately carved human bone. By the way, none of these bones are from grave robbing or human sacrifice. It's considered a great honor to have your bones turned into Kangling and Kapala, and so tantric practitioners willingly donate their bodies after death to make things like this. We're going to come back to this section in a few minutes, but first I want to go tell you about Kali and Chamunda. We're going to stay on the topic of Tantra. This arresting statue of Kali was the model for the British Museum's Tantra exhibition a few years ago. Kali is a beloved mother goddess who can help women with all matters of issues surrounding childbirth and infertility. But to the untrained eye, there is something quite terrifying about her. A lot of things, actually. But before we have a look at the statue, I just love the way that her shadow looks depicted on the wall behind her. Kali is an extremely popular Hindu goddess associated with time, death, and destruction. Clay sculptures like this one, which dates to the 1850s, are used for Kali Puja, which is prayers and devotion to this goddess. Kali represents the divine feminine and is also the divine mother. She is a mother figure to everyone, but also a terrifying beacon of mayhem and destruction. Now let's have a closer look at her. She's wearing a necklace of severed heads. And these represent the demons that she has slain in a grand battle. For every drop of the demon Raktabacha's blood that would land on the ground, another form of the demon would grow. And so Kali uses her long, lolling tongue to lick up the blood. The heads are those demon clones that she has slain, and their shin bones are shoved through her stretched earlobes. That's just like the Aztec god that we saw. In her hand, she carries a larger severed head. This is the main demon in the legend, Raktabaja, and she's standing atop one of the most important gods in Hinduism, Shiva. Now, why would she be standing atop her spiritual husband like this? Shiva throws himself under her feet as Kali is going insane with anger and vengeance after the battle. Her rage is so great that she is about to bring about the end of the world. But when she realizes that she's standing on top of her husband, her much more peaceful alter ego, let's say, comes back forth. Shiva has saved the world from coming to an end. And this always really reminds me of Xander stopping evil Willow from ending the world in Buffy. Sorry if that's too nerdy of a reference. British officials and missionaries who first went to India in the 18th and 19th centuries were really frightened and put off by figures like Kali and Chamunda, who I'm going to talk about next. They really believed that these figures were demonic and satanic. And so Kali actually became an anti-colonial symbol used in Bengal, precisely because she upset the British so much. Versions of this print, which were produced in Calcutta, were censored after the colonial administration thought that the severed heads here looked too British. Now, speaking of ferocious Hindu goddesses, we've got to go and have a look at Chamunda. Chamunda has a lot of similarities to Kali, and she's sometimes a form of Kali or the goddess Durga. She lives in the cremation grounds and surrounds herself with ghosts and jackals as she eats the human flesh. Now that really reminds me of the Agora sadhus found in the cremation ghats of Pashupatinath in Kathmandu. Here I am with a few of these guys, and yes, they are covered in human ash. This version of Chamunda has 8 arms, but she can also have 10 or 12. And in each of these, she holds a different useful weapons, as well as a skull cup filled with human blood. Kapala again. She obviously strikes a terrifying image, which is made even more frightening by her jewelry, which is made of human bones and snakes. Of course, even though that sounds really terrifying, she does have a holy purpose. Chamunda's aim is to destroy Maya, that is, delusion, the false distinction between good and bad, light and dark, so that we can all realize that everything is all one. Even the corpse that she sits upon and rides like a vehicle is meant to represent the ego. To achieve enlightenment, we must bring the ego under control, although even I'll admit that this is a pretty terrifying way to do so. I love her. Now, after seeing Chamunda, I wanted to come back over here to this section on Tantra in Tibet and show you this large paper mache or papier mache mask. Masks representing human skulls like this one that's from the mid-19th century are used in monastic Buddhist dance ceremonies. And this represents the Lord of the cremation ground, just kind of like those Agora sadhus and Chamunda. The skeletal protector expels negative forces. The dance like this one is performed at the end of the year, and it's meant to destroy the ill fortune of the previous year and bring about better luck this year. We can also see here a statue of Chitipati, spirits of the graveyard. This is a skeletal spirit that is summoned as a wisdom protector. Again, just like many other aspects of Buddhist and Hindu belief, this is a reminder of the impermanence of all things. To connect all of these things, let's look here at this purbu, or a ritual dagger, used in Nepal for religious and magical purposes. From the top, you can see the multi-layered head, the 16 arms. And the dagger portion, the blade, is all the way down at the bottom here. You can see the Kapala skull cup in the forward-facing arm on the right-hand side. The power of this purbu comes from the user identifying with the deity. In this case, it's the wrathful protector god Mahakala, wearing a crown of skulls as well as a necklace of skulls. We're going to pop over to room 24 now. We can see some Catholic votives that are used to represent body parts that are causing you a problem. I have a lot of votives in my video about the Science Museum's medical collection. Straight ahead, you can see this recreation of an intestinal votive, and that really reminds me of the liver divination that we're going to talk about. By the way, votives like these were not always used for divination. They were often made of wax, like these German kidneys that are not on display, and presented at saints' shrines in sites of pilgrimage around medieval Europe. The idea is that you would offer a replica of your own afflicted body part and hope that the saint would cure you in return for you making a vow. These are called ex voto, short for ex voto suscepto, or from the vow made. I've just walked into the Enlightenment gallery, filled with the scariest thing of all, colonization. Okay, I'm only partially kidding, but these galleries are decked out to look at the way that a 18th century gentleman collector's cabinet of curiosity might look in his own home.
Now, don't take my spooky voice as minimizing the very real harms caused by colonization and the harms of what some call this warehouse of colonial loot. There's actually an angle that I could have taken with this video about the literal and metaphorical haunting in the museum caused by restless colonial objects yearning to return to their rightful homes, and the echoes of historical trauma still very much present here. That's the crux of Noah Angel's recent book, Ghosts of the British Museum. I'm going to bring that book up again a few times in passing. This angle could make for an interesting future video.
I'm always noticing new things in here, and last year I finally noticed these two heads in glass bell jars. They're obviously mummies' heads, and when I came back to look at them more closely, they're missing from the shelf.
After searching the collection catalog and even getting in touch with the curation department, I believe that this is the accession record for one of the heads. I'm still stumped on the other. Is it this one? I'm not sure.
They feel like some kind of a fever dream, and I would think I had kind of made them up if I didn't find reference to them other places online. It's pretty common to have just mummies' heads that don't have bodies or grave goods to go with them, and that dates back to, of course, the Georgian and Victorian predilection for hosting mummy unwrapping parties and seances. And of course, just down to poor object care. People didn't know how to properly conserve the mummies that they were unwrapping if they weren't turning them into paint, fertilizing fields with them, or even turning them into medicine. I have a whole section in my very first video ever about the strangest things in the British Museum, just on the topic of corpse medicine and eating mummies. Somehow these heads escaped my notice when I was making that video. Such a shame. Now, speaking of that first video ever, we're just walking past the display case of Dr. D's objects. Dr. D was a mystic, magician, astrologer, and mathematician under Queen Elizabeth I. And he did a lot of really fascinating things in terms of alchemy and attempting to understand the, quote, language of the angels. I'm not going to talk much more about Dr. D in this video because A, it's already in that other video I told you about, and B, I've had a lot of requests on a video just about Dr. D in the future, so look out for that and let me know in the comments below if you'd be interested. But earlier when we were in the Aztec collection, I did promise you that we'd see some obsidian in an unexpected place. That unexpected place is Dr. D's show stone straight ahead. That obsidian scrying stone that he would use to see the future is actually made out of obsidian from Mexico. Behind me is one of my favorite sections in the Enlightenment gallery. It's kind of a little cabinet of curiosities within the larger cabinet of curiosities. Dr. Hans Sloane was the, quote, founder of the British Museum, and he left a lot of his objects that he collected during his lifetime to the British public in return for equivalent in today's currency of about £5 million to go to his son. Sloane was able to collect these objects because he was a slave owner and slave trader and earned a lot of money from doing that. He liked strange things like I do. He mostly collected bird species and plant species, but he loved a good oddity. And so some of the things that are in the case behind me, we think were part of his original collection. This shelf, for instance, is filled with memento mori. Memento mori means remember death in Latin, and it's a concept in a lot of medieval and early modern period art, as well as on tombs. The idea that we shouldn't get too comfortable here on earth. Instead, we should always be thinking about our afterlife and acting in accordance with morals that will get us a good one. I talk about them a lot on my different tours because they're often in museums and in art galleries. They are also often in churches, in particular in something called a trancy tomb. I always end up showing this trancy tomb when I talk about them on my channel. This is the tomb effigy of François de Seeress from around 1400 CE. This is now housed at La Sarraz Castle in Switzerland, and you can see the frogs and worms eating his face. That's a true trancy tomb, a tomb that shows the person in a state of decomposition as a reminder of the fleeting nature of life. In this tiny skull here, you can also see frogs eating this man's face. This was carved from ivory in the 17th century. It's equally repulsive and fascinating. Still has some flesh on one side that's rotting away and is skeletal on the other side. Again, lizards and frogs, a snake on the side. That snake face has definite Voldemort vibes. This one actually has a pierced bit at the top, so it could be added to a rosary as part of your religious devotion. Look at the worms entering every orifice on his face and the line of insects around his neck. Next to it too are these carved Chinese hornbill skulls. They almost remind me of plague doctor masks. But what I really want to draw your attention to here is this framed portrait at the very top of Mary Davis. We think it's from the 17th century, and it's an oil portrait of a woman with what appears to be horn-like growths coming from the side of her head. She's wearing no cap on her hair, which was unusual at the time, and that's really to highlight these horn-like growths. The inscription on the painting reads that this is the portraiture of Mary Davis, an inhabitant of Great Saugle near Chester. It was done in 1668. When she was 28 years old, an excrescence rose upon her head, which continued 30 years, like to a wen, and then grew into 2 horns. It then explains how she cut them, but they continued to grow back and spawn more. Today, we would probably say that Mary Davis had developed cutaneous horns. You can see them here. This is a relatively rare condition in which keratin, the material that your fingernails is made out of, starts protruding from a lesion that develops on the skin, and it's more likely in older people. From looking at the original catalogs, we can see that Hans Sloane did own a horn from another woman from Kent, and we think that he may have owned this portrait in his personal collection as well, just out of interest. That said, the origin of the painting in the collection is unknown. Now, we're downstairs in Africa now, and I'm going to head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo really shortly. But before I do, I couldn't resist popping over here to the hat display case and showing you a hat from Botswana, because this hat is made out of ostrich feathers and spider's web. It's obviously very beautiful, but I mean, if hat made of spider webs doesn't creep you out at least a little bit, I don't know what to say. It's made by the San people of southern Africa. This one's most likely from Botswana, and they fashioned a quite European-looking hat out of available materials, including spider silk, and that's a very tough material. When you think about it, this is incredibly ingenious. I love this hat. I show it to everybody. So we're here looking at these Nkisi, or power figures, made by the Bakongo people in the DRC. The double-headed dog is called a Kozo, and it dates to 1930. Ultimately, it's a protective figure, safeguards against evil spirits, and it can also be a remedy against evil. In Congo, dogs have a deep association with the dead. The dead are buried in the wilderness outside the village where the dogs tend to live, and therefore dogs are considered mediators between the world of the living and the world of the dead. This dog in particular has 2 heads and 4 eyes, allowing him to look in all directions and see things that humans can't necessarily see. You can see that the dog has this like very textured, spiky back. Folk medicine has been bound into the clay material, and that too has an association with the dead because of the way that the burials are prepared. And so the entire dog is kind of imbued with medicine and magic to act on behalf of the Ganga, or ritual specialist of the village. The Ganga then drives a spear or sword straight through the dog's back. Sculpture of a dog's back, not a real dog, just to be clear. Then the Ganga can begin an invocation. Now, if you've read the Ghosts of the British Museum, you'll know that this dog, as well as the quote unlucky mummy that we're going to go visit upstairs, is said to make the security guards very unsettled and uncomfortable. Take from that what you will. We're upstairs now, and we're going to go much further back in time to ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Now, let's start here with the oldest object on our tour today, the plastered human skull from Jericho in Palestine. It dates to around 7200 BCE, which of course makes it over 9,000 years old. It was discovered among a group of 7 other skulls in 1953 by archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, often called the Grand Dame of Archaeology, and 3 more have since been found. Remember, this is a real human skull that has had its lower jaw removed, and it's been covered with lime plaster. There are shells placed in the eye sockets to give the appearance of eyeballs, and sometimes red ochre was used for details, and even mustaches. Levant archaeologists are very interested in this because it provides evidence for widespread ancestor worship in the region at the time, but I really love it because it's downright creepy. I mean, just look at those quite dead eyes. It's not instantly recognizable as a human skull. By the way, an ossuary like this one would be used to place skull and bones until the flesh rotted away, and they could be used for spiritual or artistic reasons like this one. In 2009, this skull went over to the Natural History Museum to have a CT scan. The team learned then that the skull belonged to a man who was about 40 years old when he died. He had broken, badly decayed teeth and abscesses that must have been very painful. His head shape was also unusual. The varying thicknesses of bone tell us that his head was tightly bound as an infant, permanently changing its shape, as was the custom at the time. In 2016, further scans allowed the British Museum to create a facial reconstruction, and this is what we think Jericho Man looked like. Now we're in the section of the museum that's dedicated to Dr. Leonard Woolley's excavations in the ancient city of Ur. I love talking about Leonard Woolley's excavations at the Royal Cemetery of Ur. They took place between 1922 and 1934. Originally, he thought that the things he was uncovering were dating to around 750 BCE. But upon a little bit more digging, he realized that the things he was finding actually dated to 2500 BCE. That's nearly 2,000 years earlier than where he thought he was in time. There's a lot I could say about this collection. I love looking at Queen Puabi's beautiful jewelry and her very cool beer straw. But today, I obviously want to show you something a lot more macabre. During Woolley's excavations, he encountered 6 of what he believed to be royal graves that consisted of a chamber at the bottom of a deep shaft with a ramp for access. You can see them here. In those tombs, there would be a principal occupant and sometimes a few other attendants and maybe guards. However, one of these pits had a lot more bodies than the others, 74 to be exact, 6 men and 68 women, and Woolley called this the Great Death Pit. They were all arranged neatly in rows and dressed in finery. The bodies of attendants, guards, as well as musicians, so you had something to listen to in the afterlife, were all there. Even some oxen and big wheeled vehicles. These people were going above and beyond to equip themselves for the afterlife, much in the same way that their nearby neighbors were doing in ancient Egypt. Now, we think that in these different pits, including the Great Death Pit, they are servants or sacrificial victims accompanying their master or mistress in the afterlife. But what we don't know is if they did this willingly, as in the Aztec culture, or whether they were walled in or buried alive against their will. Now that alone should be enough to give you nightmares this Halloween season. It might take a second for your eyes to adjust when you look at this piece here and realize that this is a head. And yes, it looks a little squished. It's actually a completely pancaked human skull wearing a beautiful headdress, and the headdress is recreated right here. This skull is called Skull 59, and she was likely 18 to 20 years old. Nearby, we can see the crushed head of a soldier wearing a helmet of copper alloy. This guard was found at the entrance by Leonard Woolley and his excavation team, and he's also been estimated to be between 18 and 20 years old. His helmet itself, despite being quite squished, is actually in really good condition. It matches the kind of helmets that you can see over here on the Standard of Ur. The Standard of Ur was named because Woolley and his team found a pole nearby. A standard is another name for a flag, and there was this idea for a while that this might have been a flag, but it's actually a kind of trapezoidal-shaped box, and it's one of the most well-known objects of Leonard Woolley's excavations at Ur. Just to be clear, these two people, they weren't crushed to death. They were crushed later by the weight of the soil. We don't actually know how they died. Okay, but back to the human sacrifice. Did these people go willingly or were they forced into it? And there are a few competing theories. We do believe that they were given sedatives to drink before this took place, but a study at the University of Pennsylvania, by the way, Woolley was associated both with that university and with the British Museum, they have studied a few different skulls like these ones that have pre-mortem fractures. And so they believe that maybe those people took the sedative, it didn't work enough on them, and then they were clubbed over the head. There's another theory that maybe everybody drank the sedative and then everybody got clubbed over the head, but not every skull that's been found has these fractures. The jury is still out officially. Now in this next case, we have something that is very ghoulish, but also absolutely fascinating. The practice of liver divination, or reading entrails to tell the future. This is a clay model of a sheep's liver that was used to instruct future oracles at divination school. We've already encountered divination and fortune telling a few times on our tour today, but this is my favorite. Funnily enough, I have a friend who specializes in Etruscan archaeology, and she was delighted when I started messaging her questions about Haruspicy, or the practice of liver divination. But let's just be clear, that was in later Etruscan and then Roman culture. But here in ancient Mesopotamia, 4,000 years ago, it's called hepatoscopy, or hepatomancy, hep referring to the liver. That's because it was usually the liver of a sheep, specifically, that was used for the practice of divination. So this tablet, dating from the 19th to the 17th centuries BCE, was a teaching tool, but the liver is shown in reversed positions. The base of the gallbladder is pointing downward and when it should be upward. And you can see all of these different lobes and structures of the organ mapped out. See, in sheep liver, the shape of these bits varies a lot from animal to animal. So the oracle would predict the future based on the variations. You could ask very important questions about personal and public matters, and the oracle would, quote, read these anatomical surface landmarks. You can see here just how influenced the Etruscans were by the Babylonians. This, the liver of Piacenza, is more than 1,000 years later, yet it is very, very similar.
In the same case, we can see what looks like a mask, but it's also representing a sheep's intestines. The mask is of Humbaba, a giant killed by Gilgamesh. An oracle called Warad Marduk thought that the coils of the colon of a sheep he was examining for divination resembled Humbaba's face, and for him this foretold Babylonian dominion over the land under the king Sargon I of Akkad. Warad Marduk felt so excited about this powerful divination that he had this mask tablet made. In the cuneiform, it says, if the coils of the colon resemble the head of Humbaba, this is an omen of Sargon, who rules the land. And then, to ensure he gets credit, it says, written by the hand of Warad Marduk, diviner, son of Kuburum, diviner. This could be the perfect Halloween-themed tattoo.
Have you ever seen The Exorcist? If so, you're probably familiar with Pazuzu. He's the demon that possessed young Reagan. He was unearthed in an Iraqi archaeological dig by Father Marin at the beginning of the film, looming over the landscape with a rather prominent phallus and a scary face. Okay, it's more than rather prominent. But did you know that Pazuzu is a real figure found throughout Babylonian history and culture? And he was actually a protective entity. This display case is full of Pazuzu amulets, 16 that are on display. Throughout the first millennium BCE, that is 3,000 years ago, Pazuzu can be found in archaeological sites and described in cuneiform tablets, shown with a, quote, rather canine face with abnormally bulging eyes, a scaly body, a snake-headed penis, the talons of a bird, and wings. Yikes, here he is here. His head is an amulet because while he is kind of evil, he serves another purpose as well. He can also protect against winds-bearing pestilence, and he can fight the demoness Lamashtu. Now she's a particular threat to babies, stealing them back to the underworld. We find amulets like this one in houses to protect newborn infants from Lamashtu, and pregnant women were known to wear them as necklaces. Lamashtu would prowl down the streets and sniff through the doors to look for newborn babies so she could devour them. So you really had to protect yourself from her. Here she is. She's depicted on a stone tablet that the museum sadly doesn't have on display right now. She has a lion's head and she's standing on an ass while suckling a jackal and a wild pig. Pazuzu's ability to ward off Lamashtu makes him an apotropaic figure. That is, he can ward off evil, even though he's evil himself. This is where his bark is worse than his bite. He looks fearsome, but he's actually very useful and was also used in Mesopotamian white magic. We're going to head into the room of Egyptian funerary archaeology, that is, mummies. There's a reason why the mummies are some of the most popular objects for people to visit when they're here at the British Museum. Of course, so many things in the British Museum and archaeology in general are what we call grave goods. That is, objects that were placed into people's burial sites or just the way that they were buried themselves with specific customs. I mean, I'm not just going to show you everything that's ever been buried in an Egyptian grave, but there are a few Egyptian objects I definitely think we need to include. The most famous, or should I say infamous, haunted object in the British Museum. The identity of the original owner of this mummy board is unknown. A mummy board, by the way, is the name for this thin outer layer that would be placed on top of the wrappings before the mummified person would go into other layers of coffins. This mummy board comes from the 21st dynasty and was acquired by the British Museum in 1889. I'll refer to her as her, even though we're talking about an inanimate object here. But no one knows what actually happened to the mummified human remains. She's located here in room 62 with all the other Egyptian funerary archaeology, and she has quite the reputation. The inscriptions are religious phrases, so they give no clue to this person's identity, but let's start with what we do know. There's no beard present, and the positioning of the hands facing outward indicates that this is a woman. So while we don't know her identity, this is a really high-quality mummy board. There's a theory that she may have been a musician or a priestess at one of the temples of Amun-Ra. See, this mummy board has been credited with death, horrible accidents, and even large-scale disasters that have occurred to people she's come in contact with. Okay, all of a sudden I'm feeling a little nervous about including her in this video. You might hear the persistent rumor that she was on board the Titanic when it sank on the way to New York, but that's just a myth. But that didn't stop the misinformation from spreading rapidly in the years after that disaster. The celebrated clairvoyant, Madame Helena Blavatsky, is alleged to have detected an evil influence, ultimately traced to the mummy board. But the other main death that she's associated with is that of the British writer
Bertram Fletcher Robinson.
He became obsessed, some people even say possessed, by a desire to learn more about this mummy board when he worked for the Daily Express newspaper in 1904. He was convinced that the mummy board was imbued with malevolent powers, and he died just a few years later at age 36. Dozens of other deaths, tragic accidents, and misfortune have been linked to the mummy board, but let's face it, most of those have a pretty tenuous connection. But it is 100% true that night watchmen and security guards don't like coming near this mummy case. They still say it causes all kinds of problems here in room 62. What do you think? Does she fill you with dread? You already know what I think. Let's go and have a look at some of the funerary amulets on an Egyptian mummy. Amulets were used during the mummification process. For every desire or challenge you could encounter in ancient Egypt, there was an amulet associated that could provide assistance. This mummy actually dates to the Roman period after around 30 BCE. It's an unidentified man. I always joke that the British Museum is filled with mummies of middle management, and he's painted and inscribed in his shroud and covered with amulets of gilded wood that are threaded through the frame. I also really like the fact that we can see just how saturated with resin the mummy wrappings are here. I say this to people all the time and I don't think they ever believe me, but mummies genuinely do smell very good. They smell like incense, extremely redolent and quite heady in their aroma because of all the resins that were used to cure the body and saturate the bandages. On the back of the display case here, they've actually shown us the distribution of some amulets on 2 different mummies that were from Hawara. Those are 26th dynasty mummies that date between 664 and 525 BCE. You can see that the different names that are here represent different deities, different gods like Isis. Earlier in the Older and Middle Kingdom, people were typically only buried with a few amulets. These distribution patterns can be seen whenever they x-ray the mummies. During the Ptolemaic period, they stopped placing the amulets so carefully and they just kind of scattered them randomly between all the wrappings. At the bottom, there are the 4 sons of Horus. Beautiful. And just up top here on this piece of papyrus, you can see a diagram that shows how the priests were prescribing specific distribution of amulets. The British Museum has more human mummies in its collection than any other museum outside of Egypt in the world. Each of these was a real person with a real life story and brings up debates about whether we should have human remains on display in museums at all. I'm working on a video about the ethics of displaying human remains in museums, so that's a topic for a different day. But out of all of the Egyptian mummies in the British Museum, I think this one is the spookiest, the scariest, and the creepiest. This is a mummy of a young man from the Ptolemaic period, discovered in Thebes, dating to sometime after 305 BCE. He had his mummification performed very carefully. Of course, like with all Egyptian mummies, his brain has been extracted via the nose and his viscera removed through a large incision on the left center of his abdomen. We know from CAT scans, you can see those here, that his chest cavity is filled with cloth and elongated packages, which may be clay dummies. We're not sure. Before wrapping, the embalmer was very careful here to model his facial features using resin-soaked linen, and he filled out his limbs with a granular material to really give him a lifelike appearance, so much more than the others. He has really finely patterned wrapping on his forearms, and his feet have been wrapped to imitate the sandals that he no doubt wore. This is a really unusual preparation of this mummy for this time period. It really resembles mummies from the Old Kingdom. You can see how each of his fingers individually wrapped. Protective symbols on his knees. Now we're at one of my favorite displays in the British Museum. Okay, I say that a lot, but this is a discovery imbued with folk horror and British paganism. There he is, a bog body. He was discovered by commercial peat cutters in 1984 in Lindow Moss, a peat bog near Cheshire, and peat cutting gives us a clue as to the environment in which he was located. See, in this peat bog, there are very particular anaerobic conditions. Peat preserves bodies spectacularly and also helps to tan the skin, almost like leather. And that's what makes bog bodies such a valuable source for study and why they're so well preserved. By the way, one of his nicknames is Pete Marsh. Get it? Pete Marsh? Girl. You can see pictures of the bog here in the display. Bog bodies are not uncommon. I mean, we find them regularly in Scandinavia and here in Great Britain and also in Ireland. I mean, in this very bog, Lindow Woman was discovered just the year before, along with many other body parts. By the way, Lindow Woman was in such good condition that she was assumed to be the body of a woman who went missing 20 years earlier, and this prompted her husband to confess to her murder. He was then convicted based on the confession, even when it was revealed that Lindow Woman dated to the Roman period. Lindow Man is much more famous because he is in such exceptional condition. He's been called one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 1980s, and he really launched a national obsession with bog bodies. We don't know exactly when he's from, but the evidence points to sometime between 200 BCE and about 19 CE. The end of his life wasn't pretty. He had a number of 3 to 4 centimeter gashes at the top of his head, going through into his skull, as well as ligature marks around his neck, and he was found with the sinew cord still attached. He also had a number of other lacerations on his body, including a broken rib. Swelling around the edges of some of these wounds showed that he lived for some time after they were inflicted, so he really did suffer and have a painful death. Some people believe that he was killed in a ritualistic murder involving some kind of ceremony. His intestines and stomach were completely empty except for a kind of charred grain cake and a few grains of bee pollen, which some people believe he may have been forced to eat or ate voluntarily as part of the ritual. Remember, we know very little about the rites, rituals, and religion of Iron Age Britain, so it's really hard to parse the evidence that's been left behind. So yes, he may have died in a violent attack, but he may have instead died in a really significant religious ritual that meant a lot to him and others that loved him, just like the Aztec rituals. We just don't know. Now, as you gaze upon his rictus of pain on his face, I want to draw attention to the way that he's being preserved here at the British Museum. He's been freeze-dried like a strawberry in your special K. I mean, I'm laughing partially out of horror, but it was the most effective way to prevent his rapid decomposition once he was removed from the bog. Rensvurenman, a bog body discovered in 1871 in a German moor, was smoked. Just like with Jericho Man, we can see that he's been through all kinds of testing and radiographs. We can see a reconstruction of his skull and what he might have looked like here, staring right into the face of the past. All right, I'm just popping into a part of the museum that I don't come very often, which is 19th century Europe, just to see the famous death mask of Napoleon. Well, one of them. This is Napoleon's death mask, made after a mold taken by his doctor Francesco. If it looks familiar, it's because so many different museums have copies of this mask. Plenty of faces to see his mug. So we've already seen quite a few objects today having to do with divination and fortune telling, but this has to be one of my favorites. This is an iron Seeress's staff, often called the Viking divination hook. Originally accessioned into the collection, that is a fancy word for added, in 1894, and at that point it was called a fishing rod. However, it has been extensively studied and is now thought to be a divination rod or hook, which likely belonged to a seeress, also known as a vulva. These women were said to have such enormous powers that they could help even Odin, king of the gods. Vulvas had wands, divination hooks, and special seats that allowed their souls to travel. You can see a little representation of one here. This amulet in the National Museum of Denmark is a form of that special chair where the seeress sat during seances. This one was found in a seeress's grave in Fyrkat, a former Viking castle in Denmark, and the site of a massive archaeological dig. Here's a reconstruction of the seeress's grave there. Wow. Some other objects found in women's graves include intoxicants and weird little collections of small objects, including owl pellets, which we believe were used for divination. Norse seeresses would hold a special staff like this one and carry out a practice called seder. A chorus of young girls would chant ritual songs, allowing her to enter different dimensions to see the future or the truth about the present, with the help of hallucinogens, of course. I think a cool representation of a Norse seeress in a state of seder is Björk's character in the Robert Eggers movie, The Northman. By the medieval period, Christianity had mostly taken over in the Norse countries, and the practice of seder was banned. Unsurprisingly, this word that originally referenced the most powerful women in society came to mean witch. And by the way, if you notice the linguistic similarity between vulva and vulva, well, you're not alone. I investigated the etymology of both, and they are surprisingly believed to be unrelated. Vulva comes from the Latin for wrapped or covering, while the Norse vulva means staff carrier. I'm still suspicious that there's got to be some link, though. Now we're going to head to the final object on our tour. This is not actually an object I normally include on tours. I only discovered it while doing research for this video, and this is my first time seeing it or noticing it in person. It's breathtaking. It's called the Saint Oda Reliquary. Now, if you're Catholic or Orthodox, you probably take reliquaries for granted, but for the rest of us, they are truly macabre oddities, and I love talking about them. Here at the British Museum, we have many different reliquaries. I mean, this right here is a little reliquary cross, and this case is filled with reliquary pendants. I mean, let's not forget these reliquary heads of St. Eustace. Most of them, though, are now empty, but this one does contain pieces of human bones, though not those that belong to Saint Oda. It dates from 1170, depicting Saint Oda, one of a few that I discovered while researching this video.
She was a Merovingian noblewoman
And the foundress of the Abbey of Amay, now in Wallonia, Belgium. She was probably born around the year 560 in Swabia and was married to Bodegisel, sometimes called Bobo or Bogus. These weirdo names make me really want to learn more about Frankish history. Their son, supposedly, was Arnulf, who became Saint Arnulf of Metz. And Saint Arnulf of Metz is the patron saint of brewing, by the way. There is another Saint Oda from the 8th century. She's known as Oda of Scotland or Oda the Blind. But this reliquary comes from the woman from a few centuries earlier, with the full name of Crodoara, shortened to Oda. Hagiographies can get really confusing. This one is part of a pair. It was the door on the reliquary at the church in Amay, where it was replaced with this shrine casket in around 1250. The two doors then became reliquaries in their own right, with cavities added to hold the relics. The cavities were covered with pieces of translucent horn, allowing the relics inside to be seen. Sadly, we only have one of the two here. Traditionally, the two pieces were kept together as a pair until the turn of the 20th century. That's when this panel, depicting Christ treading on a snake and a lion, was sold to Henry Walters of the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, and this piece, depicting Saint Oda herself, was sold to Sir Julius Werner. He ultimately bequeathed it to the British Museum. In the center, we can see Saint Oda holding a closed book in her left hand. On her right hand, her fingers are cupped, which might have held her abbess's walking stick. We'll see that again on her sarcophagus. She's flanked by female figures personifying religion and almsgiving, notable characteristics of the ever-pious widow Oda. The reliquary doesn't actually contain any relics of Saint Oda herself. Those were placed in the new shrine at Amay. The relics beneath the horn mounts in this reliquary are identified in vellum written in red ink. Clockwise, from the bottom left, they read, the skull of one of the 11,000 virgins of Cologne, something from the head of the St. Elizabeth widow, that is, St. Elizabeth of Thuringia, some of the milk of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and something from St. Agnes. By the way, I am obsessed with St. Ursula and the cult of the 11,000 virgins in Cologne. I really want to go there this winter, so let me know in the comments below if you'd be interested in seeing this amazing church. Speaking of traveling to the continent, I also want to go to Amay to see this. See, in 1977, a team of 3 archaeologists excavating in the choir discovered the sarcophagus of Saint Crodoara. The sarcophagus was probably made around 730, when the saint's bones were exhumed to re-establish her sanctity. You can see that she's depicted in an abbess holding her staff. It's unique in a lot of ways, featuring the text and her image, and is the only such sarcophagus for a woman. It's visible under a pane of glass in the floor of the choir of the Collegiate Church of Amay. And maybe more bones and reliquaries and ossuaries will be the subject of next Halloween's video. That's the end of our tour today, though, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed the spooky and bizarre things that I've shown you, that it sent chills down your spine, and that you have a very happy Halloween. I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum.